4:20. We should have started at 4:20.
That's Melissa's, that's not mine.
We are going to get started. Thank you all, first of all, for coming. My name is Libby Gibson. I'm the town manager. We are here today because we organized this forum because the Board of Selectmen, in light of the statewide referendum approved about a year ago in November of 2016, which legalized recreational marijuana in Massachusetts, has been having a lot of discussion about how it will impact Nantucket and what the town and community's reaction to it ought to be. So we're very aware of the vote on the referendum question, which was a pretty decent majority. And there are a lot of state rules and regulations governing the legalization aspect of things here. So cities and towns all over the state are doing a lot of different things with regard to follow up on the law. So our intent today is really to answer questions and get public input. The more, the better. I'm going to introduce the panelists in just a moment, and then they are going to help answer questions and perhaps indicate their agency's position if need be. We're going to have our town attorney give a brief overview of the law, so everybody hopefully is on the same page with what it does and doesn't do generally, and it's pretty dynamic, so there's a lot of changes happening. We're going to give you a brief overview of the articles that are on the November 6th special town meeting warrant that relate to this matter, and then we'd like to take public input. So we're going to take a little bit of time to go through these intro items and then spend the bulk of our time getting public comment. This is Roberto Santamaria. He is our public health director for the town of Nantucket. Katie Loffman is an attorney with Copeland and Page, the town's lawyers. Bill Pittman is our chief of police. I think you all know him. Don Hill-Holgate is the chairman of the Board of Selectmen. Jason Bridges is another board member. Rachel Day is the director of human services for the town. And Erin Schrader has been asked to be a panelist. She is with ASAP. So that was the intro, and I think we move to Katie now. I think we have a brief PowerPoint for Katie to quickly take us through. Katie's
to go through this.
Yep. Yeah, Katie's been to board meetings a few times now, explaining the law and some different updates. And if anybody's been following this, it's been on the Board of Selectmen's public meeting agenda several times now. While we're getting that ready, I'm meant to be the kind of moderator of this forum, and I'll be, when people want to make comments, we're going to ask you to please come to a microphone. This is being televised, this forum, and people can't hear you if you are not at a mic. And I will do my best to call on everybody. I might not know everybody's name, but I think we'd like to get your name, not for any legal reason, just to sort of know history. But if you don't want to give it, that's perfectly fine. And we want to, have it be orderly. There may or may not be strong opinions about this. And again, we're just trying to get public input and answer questions. Katie?
Thank you. All right, I'll be brief, hopefully. So on November 8th, the Massachusetts voters approved ballot question 4, which is legalizes the recreational use of marijuana and marijuana establishments within the Commonwealth. There was a lot of feedback on that initial ballot question, and on July 28th, Governor Baker signed into law the legislature's revised law on the matter, which is known now as an act to ensure safe access to marijuana. Let's see. So just briefly, so that we're all sort of on the same page with what we're talking about on the recreational level, there is there's laws governing the personal consumption of marijuana, which I'll get to later. And then there are laws that are going to govern the retail and commercial side of recreational marijuana. And those are all known under an umbrella term of marijuana establishments. So when we use that term, we're talking about all of the subsets of retail and commercial uses, including cultivation, independent testing laboratories, marijuana product manufacturers, retailers, or any other type of licensed marijuana-related business. Now, when we say licensed, the licensing authority for marijuana in the Commonwealth is going to be the Cannabis Control Commission, which is going to operate similar to the Alcoholic Beverages Control Commission. And they're going to have authority over regulations and issuance of licenses for commercial production and sale of marijuana. They're going to adopt procedures for transfer and renewal of licenses, and they are also going to become the licensing authority for medical marijuana treatment centers, which had previously been under the authority of the Department of Public Health. So briefly, the timeline for how this is all going to roll out. Already a couple of things have happened. A cannabis advisory board has been put in place. That's a 25-member board, representation from across a number of different agencies and interests. On September 1st, the Cannabis Control Commission was first appointed, and they are going about putting in place regulations at this point in time. They're taking a lot of public comment, doing public hearings, but we don't have anything in the way of formal regulations at this point. So by March 15th of 2018, that's when the Cannabis Control Commission will have adopted its licensing scheme. And they are also charged with putting in place some special regulations for the islands, so Dukes and Nantucket. Those will not be adopted until May 1st, perhaps earlier, but by May 1st, there should be special regulations. As you are probably aware, those will likely govern the transportation of marijuana across the waters, since those are fall within federal jurisdiction, and marijuana is still a regulated illegal substance on the federal level. There's a lot of questions as to how that might play out on a regulatory basis, since the boat and airline transportation would fall under federal authority at this point in time. So by April 1st, that's when the Cannabis Control Commission will start accepting recreational marijuana licenses. This is for all just the commercial side of things. These regulations these applications will be governed by the zoning bylaws or ordinances on the local level that are in effect at the time of application. So this April 1st, 2018 date is an important date for municipalities with respect to what types of regulations they want to have in place governing the recreational industry. By June 1st, that's the earliest date that licenses will be issued by the Cannabis Control Commission. July 1st at the outside, because the Cannabis Control Commission will have 90 days in which to process these applications. Sorry. All right. So this is what municipalities may do with respect to, sorry, having trouble with my own computer here. Just trying to get it to go down. I'll look up here. So municipalities may regulate the time, place, and manner of marijuana establishment operations, and they may do so by adopting ordinance or bylaws that impose reasonable safeguards on the operation of marijuana establishments. The only limitation on that is that these regulations on the municipal level may not be unreasonably practicable. There's a specific state definition of that, but basically it means that it cannot be so stringent that it provides a regulation that renders these uses economically unfeasible. Municipalities may also adopt ordinances or bylaws that address public nuisance in the cultivation, processing, and manufacturing areas, and they can put restrictions on public signs and establish a civil penalty for violations of ordinances or bylaws. The standard practices under state law for adoption of bylaws apply if you're regulating time, place, and manner of marijuana establishments. In addition to just regulating the use per se, there's also a specific statutory procedure in place for municipalities that want to impose some sort of ban or limitation on marijuana establishments. There are 3 different types of bans or limitations that can be imposed. One is a full prohibition on one or more types of marijuana establishments. So that means, for example, you could prohibit retail sales but allow for cultivation or testing facilities. You could have that side of the industry but not the other side. Or you can have a full ban on all types. You can also limit the types of establishments point number 2, you can impose limitations on the types of marijuana retailers to fewer than 20% of the number of retail off-premises alcoholic beverages licenses. And then you can also impose a limitation by linking the type of marijuana establishments to fewer than the number of medical marijuana treatment centers that are registered to engage in the same type of activity in the municipality. If you're going to impose a limitation or a ban, there are specific procedures that apply on the local level. For municipalities that have voted in favor of question 4, which Nantucket did, there is a 2-step process that has to be followed. The bylaw imposing the limitation or the ban must be approved by voters by ballot at an annual or special election, and the bylaw must also be approved by the local legislative body, which here is town meeting. We have been asked in many municipalities to address the question of whether the bans or prohibitions may be done by general or zoning bylaw. Because there is substantial ambiguity in the law at this point in time, we have been recommending to municipalities that they consider adopting both if they're going the partial ban, full ban, or limitation route. There is also language in the Act that addresses how existing marijuana medical treatment centers will be handled with respect to conversion. There's a requirement that prohibits a zoning ordinance or bylaw from preventing a medical marijuana establishment licensed by the Commonwealth on or before July 1st of 2017 from converting to a recreational marijuana establishment that is engaged in the same type of activity. It's my understanding that there has been one such license issued in Nantucket, so there is a possibility, absent a full ban of establishments on the island, that there is one provider that potentially has the opportunity to convert under this provision. One provision that is very favorable to municipalities under the new legislation is that of the host community agreement. Host community agreements are now required for both medical marijuana treatment centers and recreational marijuana establishments. And under these agreements, a municipality may impose a community impact fee that shall not amount to more than 3% of the gross sales of that establishment. Those agreements can be in place for up to 5 years, and there's no provision that precludes a renegotiation at the end of that 5-year term. However, those community impact fees are supposed to be reasonably related to the cost imposed upon the municipality, and there needs to be a documentation of those impacts. One zoning strategy that many municipalities have employed with respect to the marijuana establishments is that of a zoning moratorium. A zoning moratorium is basically a pause. It's not a ban. It's not a restriction, a permanent restriction. It's a temporary provision that's imposed through your zoning bylaw and is done for the purpose of allowing municipalities additional time to study new issues and new areas of law and determine how they want to proceed on a planning basis. The Attorney General has approved these types of moratoriums in approximately 1/3 of the communities in Massachusetts at this point in time. And I think that came as a bit of a surprise to the marijuana industry. We have been hearing word that these could be perhaps subject to some challenge as an improper ban, but at this point in time, we are still recommending that municipalities consider imposing a moratorium if they are thinking about potential zoning in terms of bans, limitations, or even just how you want to regulate time, place, and manner to allow municipalities the opportunity to go through the types of processes that you're going through now and determining how the community would like to regulate marijuana in the long term. So one of the changes to the law that happened post adoption of ballot question 4 is that of the agricultural exemption. In Massachusetts, there is a provision which allows an exemption from zoning for agricultural uses. This does not apply to marijuana growers, and so they cannot, at this point in time, claim an exemption for zoning for agricultural use for the growing of marijuana. One benefit to municipalities that are looking to regulate time, place, and manner and allow marijuana establishments within their communities is that of a local tax option. Under 64N, municipalities may accept this provision and impose a local tax of up to 3% on the marijuana retailers operating within their communities. Nantucket has already voted this local acceptance up to 2%. It was increased, the amount was increased to 3% under the most recent amendments to the legislation. It's my understanding there's a ballot there is a article on the town warrant that would adopt the 3% increase. Now, just a quick summary. Outside of the retail and commercial side of things, the legalization of marijuana also allows for some personal use, and I wanted to just briefly cover what is allowed under personal use. So this is sort of outside the context of the commercial side of things. Individuals who are 21 years of age or older may possess 2 ounces or less of marijuana. Within your primary residence, a person may possess up to 10 ounces of marijuana and any marijuana products on the premises for personal use by not more than 6 marijuana plants. However, if you have 2 growers on the premises, you can increase that number to 12 plants. You can give away or transfer without remuneration to a person 21 years of age or older up to 1 ounce of marijuana, provided that such transfer is not advertised or promoted to the public. And you may also possess or manufacture marijuana accessories or sell accessories to persons 21 years of age or older. There are some limitations, however, on the personal consumption and possession side of things. These just highlight a few that are of particular note. Cultivation and processing of marijuana plants may not be visible from a public place. Marijuana or marijuana products exceeding 1 ounce within a person's place of residence must be secured by a lock. And no person shall consume marijuana in a public place or smoke marijuana where smoking tobacco is prohibited. We've had lots of questions about what constitutes a public place. That generally, under legal terms, is a pretty expansive definition of any place where the public is either invited or has the right to access. Finally, open containers of marijuana or marijuana products are prohibited in the passenger area of any motor vehicle. And there are also provisions relating to operation under the influence, which I have not specifically covered here. So that is my brief summary of the law. As Libby mentioned, this is a dynamic area. We do not have state regulations. We expect that we will see a lot more come from the Cannabis Control Commission in the coming months with respect to how the state is going to regulate this. That will provide better insight to municipalities on the areas that are left for their control. But for now, we know at least the zoning area of things where municipalities may begin to do their planning process and determine how they want to proceed.
Good afternoon. I'm really thrilled to see so many people here because we really want to hear from you so we can make decisions on policy going forward. I'm just going to briefly go over the articles that are proposed for the special town meeting. We have 3. The first is a temporary moratorium, and this was a difficult decision for us, but we were advised that it was best to try to put this in place because we will not know the final state laws until March 15th, which actually does not even give us time to put any articles on for the annual town meeting. And further, we won't know until May special provisions that will be put in place by the state for the islands because we have to deal with crossing water and air, which is federally regulated. And then June 1st, as Katie mentioned, the first license could be issued for an establishment to open. And we don't know what we would need to put in place to regulate that. So we're asking for the temporary moratorium until December of next year. that would allow us time to revise any kind of zoning, any kind of policy that we would need to put in place at another special town meeting next fall. So then we are also proposing a zoning regulation that mirrors what we already put in place as a community for the medical establishments. And this would limit the areas to commercial neighborhood and commercial industrial. So there's a few distinct locations, Amelia Drive, some areas by the airport. There are some areas over by the hospital. However, those are within 500 feet of a school, so they would not comply. So both of those would require 2/3 vote at town meeting. They're both zoning articles, and we would like to see both put in place. On the expiration of the moratorium, the zoning would go into effect. But again, we would have the ability to make changes at a subsequent town meeting once we know all of the laws that are in place next spring. And then the final one is going to the 3% local tax. And there has been discussion that we would potentially like that funding to go directly to substance abuse programs. So we'd like to have the option to go to that 3%. Do you want to add?
With the moratorium, it's just for recreational, not medical, right? If it passed, right? So
Correct.
medical could still come in at any time. So make that clear.
And it has nothing to do with the personal use.
Great. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions or comments? I think now's the time where we're going to open it up, and anybody is welcome to speak, ask a question, make a comment. We really are looking to see what public input might be. And again, please come to a mic. Someone has to be first.
I'll go first. Hi there, Carl Linval, citizen on the island. No interest in starting my own business of any kind, but I was curious why the CI and CN zones were chosen exclusively, and why it wasn't opened up to other parts, other zoning districts. You know, like I could easily see a pot store on Main Street, and I know that might make some cringe, but I just wondering why it's so restrictive at the time.
Unfortunately, today, the Director of Planning and the Deputy Director of Planning were not able to be here. They're off island at a conference that was pre-scheduled. Holly Backus, our land use planner, is going to try to address any specific questions about the zoning.
The zoning was discussed at the planning board hearings. At the end of the day, my understanding is that these two zoning classifications are better suited for this type of use. I'm actually familiar with other jurisdictions that are utilizing the industrial area for this type of use. Even in other locations throughout the country, if you're wanting to have a place where you can go see topless women, for instance, an industrial area would be the best suited for this type of use. Other than that, I'm not too privy on why we chose, but that is my understanding.
I don't want to answer it because I'm not a zoning person at all, but one of the reasonings that I had heard was it's a lot easier to start restrictive and become less restrictive than it is the other way around.
It is on. All right. Just want to make sure. My name is Jeff Roos. I'm the president and CEO of Mass Medi Spa. We do have the license to operate in Nantucket County for medical cannabis. We have encountered the restrictiveness of zoning in not just Nantucket, but also with our other license in Plymouth County. So we've been doing this since the law was passed in 2012. It's been a long road, to say the least, but we do have our license. One of the pitfalls was, again, the setbacks. Even in the zones that are allowed, you have that 500-foot buffer. So we spent, a considerable amount of money and time and effort securing a location that at the end of the day was approved by the DPH, but due to a setback to a place where children might congregate, 80% of that lot was unusable for cannabis. So it really didn't make financial sense to our nonprofit to move forward with that location. It's been, my goal every day as the president of the nonprofit to expedite the process of opening a medical cannabis dispensary on the island. We do plan on opening as soon as humanly possible, but the zoning has been a hurdle. We do have a couple locations in the CI and CN zones that we are considering, but again, it is cost prohibitive in many instances. So it's been a real struggle, and as a nonprofit, our sole goal is to have access to cannabis legally on this island. I think we can all agree that without legal access, what you're left with is a black market, and that black market is not regulated, it's not taxed. The products that make it here from wherever they come from are not tested, so you don't know about mold or contaminants or anything else. And so my goal has been to provide the access, that we started out almost 5 years ago. So I am very confident that we will get open in a timely manner with the help of the board and the community who, obviously voted in favor. I'm sure not everybody in this room is pro-cannabis as I am, but and that's okay. It's a democracy, and I do, just want to remind everybody that the voters have spoken, and we're simply trying to follow the letter of the law with the state and the local municipality to make sure that when we open, we operate in a very professional manner. Our board consists of Dan Balling, who's a pharmacist, so we really want to do a pharmacy model. We are medical only. We have doctors, nurses on our board. That being said, the changes to the recreational law are clearly something that we have to discuss as a business. We have to acknowledge that, moratoriums or not, it'll eventually happen. And so our plan would be to apply for those transitional license to locate one brick and mortar dispensary on this island. And again, we compete with the black market. It still exists. It will exist after we open. And our goal is really to provide legal access. So I'm happy to answer any questions from anybody if they have them.
Holly McGowan. I just hope, I think the moratorium would be really wise for our town to vote for. I think to plan for this would be the best decision for everybody. And I hope people will consider youth in this picture because it is problematic for children. It's problematic for people under the age of 21 as brains are developing. And a lot of people might not think about that, but there are a lot of consequences when youth do engage with substance before their brains are fully developed. And Aaron, who is representing our Alliance for Substance Abuse Prevention Board, has information. We've been taking surveys of students, and their perception of the risk of marijuana in particular is very low. So they already feel that it's not harmful. And we're getting into dangerous territory if we don't plan fully for recreational use, I think. So
I'd just like to address that. I completely agree. the adolescent brain is developing. Cannabis, there aren't any studies that show scientifically that it is detrimental. I'm sure, there are anecdotal studies here and there. Cannabis is used as a medicine in childhood epilepsy. It's one of the only things that work for some of these patients who have epileptic seizures, and they are children. And, the parents of these children have to make that decision because they either have their child who is seizing up multiple times during a day and the medication that they're using is not effective, and cannabis is. So, yes, there are dangers. I would say that cannabis or marijuana or weed or whatever you want to call it is already available to kids. I would say, it's probably even more available than alcohol. Alcohol, you need an ID to go to a store, and you have to be a certain age, and you have to have a valid ID before you get the alcohol. Of course, kids, being kids, they will drink underage. That's just human nature. Right now on the black market, the dealers, the people who have cannabis and supply it, they don't card. So my counter argument to that would be yes, of course. Nobody wants to increase the amount of use of illicit substances, be it tobacco, alcohol, cannabis, in minors. Nobody's in favor of that, of course. But my counter argument would be that's what we're doing here. We're putting an institution into place where you have to be a registered patient and you have to have a card, or in a recreational instance, you have to be 21. So yes, I mean, it's a controversial issue. I understand, addiction is a big problem, and, I think there's strong opinions on all sides. I personally, and this is just speaking from my personal opinion, would be that, cannabis has gotten a bad rap for the, past 70 years. And when you look at the data versus something that is already legal, like alcohol, that I'm sure anybody in this room can say, yes, I've tried alcohol, and I know people who drink alcohol regularly. Alcohol contributes to thousands and thousands of deaths. Whether or not you're 21 or not under, it is a destructive substance, and it's legal. And so the whole push to regulate recreational cannabis was coming from the idea that let's just regulate it and tax it like alcohol, put it on a level playing field. And of course, there are always going to be, people who, get their hands on something they're not supposed to, and that's up to parents and the community to make sure that doesn't happen. But again, I don't think by establishing a place where people have to have ID, just like a liquor store, is going to contribute more to kids getting their hands on it because they can already get it very easily now without a registered place to dispense.
Thank you. I think Roberto wants to briefly address some of that.
Yes. One of the things that's important to understand here, we're talking about the recreational part. You made a medical argument. One of the things that I would definitely push back on is that, yeah, there is definitely some scientific articles. I'm actually staring at one right now from the Psychiatric Clinical Neuroscience Journal about how THC does cross the placental barrier and affects neurophysiology of fetuses as well as children. It also increases the dependency of the child when it's born. So one of the things that we all have to talk about with this moratorium, and we have to think about a way to regulate things, is that, yes, if you have a prescription for it and if there is a medical use for it and if the scientific community supports it, you can use the medical portion of it. But we're talking about the recreational part here, and I believe Holly and the Alliance for Substance Abuse Prevention is talking about some of this recreational access for youth. And I would also take it a step further and caution against recreational use for people who are pregnant because of the issues with the fetal and neural development. Because 10 years from now, we'll end up with a bunch of halflings that have a natural dependency on this green leaf. Halflings as in children, not stunted growth. So it's just something that we just have to be a little bit of cautious.
Yeah, I totally, I'm all for caution, and looking up the sources, I'm familiar with what you're referencing. The effects aren't really outlined there. There was another study done in another country that has a lot of cannabis use, even among pregnant women in Jamaica, and they found that the rate of fetal incidences where there's complications is less than in other countries where alcohol use and other drug use may be higher. So while I'm not saying pregnant women should be having cannabis, that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is the leap to now it's the baby's going to be hooked on weed is as far-fetched as I think it could be. It's just not proven that is the case.
Thank you. I think we're trying to get more at how people feel about the moratorium and the zoning articles rather than the scientific articles that may or may not be out there. Melissa?
I was just going to ask that we keep the focus on the conversation about what we're voting on. I think we're not having a debate and a conversation about marijuana and its effects on pregnant people, children. I think we're trying to create the safest zoning and the best policies that the Board of Selectmen and the town can create to protect children while we honor the vote of the people. So I just want to keep the conversation, I would like to keep the conversation focused on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question, because the moratorium is on both the recreational and medical, or is the moratorium only on the recreational?
Recreational only.
Only on recreational. So this debate that we're having is out of context.
The
Let's
medical's
stick with
already
that.
been approved.
It's already been passed. We can agree to disagree.
And it's actually more about the retail sales than personal recreational use.
Yes, it doesn't affect personal use either. It's just about commercial establishments. And I would really love to get some direction from the community in regard to not only these articles, but how you want us to proceed going forward. It's hard to really figure out from our perspective when people voted yes, what part of it they really definitively wanted to see on Nantucket. Was it because you wanted personal use? Was it because you wanted to be able to have your own plants? Is it because you want an equal number of retail marijuana shops to like the liquor stores we have? Or do you want to see one? Do you want to see none? Do you want to see it grown here? Do you want to see a testing lab here? I need some feedback as your representative on those big questions.
My name is Meg Blair Valero. I live here in town, Nantucket, with my children. I don't have a dog in this fight at all. It's more a point of information and questions. I'm curious on the zoning piece of this, of those red and blue spots on our piece of paper, if any research has been done to say how many of those are actually viable locations. I mean, are there 5 viable locations in there? Are there 50? Are there 2? How many of those spaces actually could be used for this use as intended with the 500-foot setback? And I guess my secondary question to that, so I've done some work in this space in ancillary businesses from a business advisory standpoint. They're not generally viable. This is a really expensive industry to get into. It's very cost prohibitive. Making it work financially for some place that's as isolated as Nantucket is tough, and I'd love to hear from the business people in the room, and I know there's some folks here that write business plans for that industry. My understanding is that the market itself would limit, at least in the long run, the number of dispensaries for retail purpose that we would have here in Nantucket. So that the fear that there's going to be 25 of these things like we have 25 liquor stores is maybe not valid, but I'd be interested to hear from the business people that really know this, what they think about that.
On the first part of your question, that's actually something that I just brought up, was to reevaluate that and make sure that we're not being too restrictive with the zoning in terms of where children congregate, because it does go beyond schools in terms of that portion of the law. I don't think we have a clear answer on that yet.
My name is Mark Koshan. Other municipalities have already taken all of these issues on. Colorado has had this in play for years. What is their community's feelings about this? I know each community has a little different take, but to automatically put this in the same realm as a strip joint seems to be a little restrictive. So I think that we have to be a little bit more open to what the market will decide, whether it's on Main Street or somewhere else. I just think saying it has to be in an industrial location is way too restrictive. And I'd like to know what other communities, how they've addressed this. I'm sure you've looked at this.
It is beyond an industrial location, commercial neighborhood's not industrial. I believe that it's commercial neighborhood is not an industrial location. That's commercial industrial is one, commercial neighborhood is the other, which is most likely where a retail establishment would end up. But industrial might be where a growing establishment or a testing establishment would be. I don't know the answer to everything that Colorado's been through. A lot of what I've heard is more anecdotal. So I don't want to speak too much to it.
So I'm only making a comment on my personal experience. I lived in Denver, Colorado for about 2 years. In the area that I was in Denver proper, there are about 600 dispensaries. Basically a dispensary on every corner. Super saturated. Some of them were in very terrible areas that actually brought the area that previously was terrible into a little bit of a renaissance, shops open, coffee shops open. Other areas were exactly, industrial areas. I think Nantucket just being a relatively small place to begin with, and then, as I mentioned in my first comment, the zoning was very restrictive. It was hard to find a property that was A, on the market, B, on the market for a price that made any sense. People, obviously know that you want to operate a dispensary and they just see dollar signs. And so they say, we want an exorbitant amount more than the property is worth. And so that combined with the setbacks made, there really are only one or two viable locations for a dispensary to operate and grow on the island. Part of the pricing or the need of capital, somebody else mentioned, very capital intensive, comes the fact that Nantucket is an island, and you've mentioned transport has been an issue. So we as a medical dispensary are looking to grow on the island. And then the idea is, eventually there will be a way to transport off the island to other dispensaries if that's the way it goes, or the other way around. I'm hoping we will have an island-grown product that we can participate in a wholesale market, because that is a change that is coming. The Cannabis Commission and the DPH met on Friday, and they said, they released a statement and said early November they will be making some changes to the medical marijuana program. Transportation won't be until much later, but our initial plans is to grow on the island, employ as many local people as we can on the island, and utmost concern, just provide access for patients.
I have a quick question on the growing. Maybe you guys, where can you grow? Is it zoning? Can I grow in my commercial backyard? Can it be at a farm? Where can we grow in Nantucket?
As a private resident, you can grow up to 12.
Commercial.
For a commercial operation, you have to be located in the commercial industrial or the commercial neighborhood zone, nowhere else.
Okay, I didn't know if there was.
The one question that I have, you have your license for Plymouth County. What regulations and restrictions are going on up there compared to here?
So it's
Greg, can you repeat that in the microphone?
Sorry. No, I was just asking about, since he already has his license for Plymouth, what kind of restrictions or how far ahead of the game are they? Because I know Delahunt was
Yeah, so it's based on the town zoning regulations, just like they would be here in the town of Nantucket. In the town of Norwell, where we're currently located, it's a very similar zoning regulation, although they added you can't be within a 500-foot buffer of a residence, which thank God wasn't in the zoning language here, because then there would be absolutely nowhere to locate. We are a little farther along. We have our special permit for our Norwell location. And that is, part of the process that will go through the town, hopefully in the coming months.
I'm a little bit disheartened at where this conversation is going, but I think it's important for us to remember what kind of a community do we want to represent. And I think our town leaders are saying we need more time to look at this very complicated issue. We all know we have a huge drug and alcohol problem on this island. We have a lot of bars, and this is the party community. I really want us to make the right decision, take the time to look at what we want to do as a community. Marijuana is now the law of the land. I have to live with that. But I have grandchildren, and I want to make sure we get it right. Give us the time and the expertise to really come up with what is needed. I don't want to rush to judgment and start having these facilities. Medical marijuana has its place, and I think that will go along as it needs to be. But this recreational question is a lot more complicated, and let's take the time to really look at it.
Hi there, Carl Lindvall again. I have a question on the minimum separation of 500 feet between public schools, private schools, or licensed daycare, or my understanding where children may congregate. My question is two sides to this. If there already is an established store, does that then make it restrictive for other daycares and other schools to open near that store? Does it work both ways? So say we have an established medical marijuana store on Amelia Drive, and now someone decides that they want to open a daycare on Amelia Drive. Is that daycare now equally restricted where they cannot open within 500 feet of said property?
No, so the marijuana establishment that's first in time, and that came into that location without any other place where children congregate around it, would basically be grandfathered in its location. It wouldn't have to, there wouldn't be some sort of restrictive provision that would come. Now, if you're looking to locate a child care center, would you be precluded from locating it within 500 feet? There's no similar bylaw that restricts where a child care center locates after the fact.
Okay. And I guess my follow-up question to that was, when establishing a medical marijuana facility, if two people in the same neighborhood are bilaterally trying to achieve the same business, so like one's trying to open a daycare and one's trying to open a marijuana store at the same time, is there a first in, or is it who gets their license? Or I'm basically asking if somebody had wanted to thwart a project and said, I'm going to get my daycare license in my house because I don't want a marijuana thing on my street, does that then squash a medical marijuana facility?
I mean, we're in the realm of extreme hypothetical right now. But,
it is, but I'm just saying that what I'm coming from is that it's already very restrictive, and if somebody wanted to play a legal limbo, it could become even more restrictive. So I guess that's where I'm asking for some guidance.
So the language that's proposed in the zoning amendment says a minimum separation of 500 feet, and then it's between the marijuana establishment and state certified public and private schools or state licensed daycare centers. So if you're going to get your state license for a daycare center, if you get that after somebody gets their license for a marijuana establishment, then you're later in time. If you get it before, then I suppose you could raise it as an issue.
Okay.
But
thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Denise LeBombard, and I just want to say I've been out in Colorado and I was curious about what this was all about. So I went into one of those stores, and it's not like you go in a grocery store and they just have everything lined up. They had a cage that the woman was behind. You had to give your license, then you had to go in a waiting room. Then they took you into another room that was you were the only person in there buying with another person. They had all the product and explained blah 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 blah. But I think it would be worthwhile to talk to maybe like Vail or some of the little resort areas in Colorado and see how they deal with it, because it's a similar kind of place. And we're trying to figure out something that we know nothing about. And I guess it would be, I think, really helpful, because I don't think we really have a comprehension of what it's like to have a store. What it's going to look like and what it's going to be like. And if you walk in the door, do you just walk in and buy something off the shelf, or someone can shoplift it off the shelf? That's not how it is out there at all. So I don't know. That's just maybe a suggestion.
Jennifer Costanzo. I really like the point that Dawn raised in regards to the community's desire, and that you're seeking information from the community so the Board of Selectmen has more guidance to guide us as a community to make these complicated decisions. Yes, we voted as a community to, legalize marijuana use, but was that just for personal use? I'm unclear. Did we really vote and want to have marijuana dispensaries on Main Street? I don't ever recall that being a ballot question. I think that the way it's presented, that if you're a citizen and if you want to smoke marijuana, you can have up to 2 ounces, you can grow your plants, you can do your thing, just like you could, brew your own beer at your house. So I think if I was someone, which, 35 years ago, I would have been all over this. But as a parent and being a little bit older and more concerned, I look at this, and because I love this community, I am careful and try to be more thoughtful in the way things are placed within our community. We are unique in an island, not having red lights, not having, all the things that make Nantucket unique. So, I would be interested when Dawn asked, do we want A, B, and C? And if we just took a quick survey here, are we here in this room saying, do we want recreational dispensaries on Nantucket? Raise your hand. Do you want recreational dispensaries on Nantucket? Raise your hand. Okay. Do you want medical marijuana dispensaries on this island? Raise your hand.
Yes.
So that, to me, is more. Yes, that's what we're saying. We do want medical. So then my next question would be, how many people on Nantucket would really benefit from medical marijuana dispensaries on this island? How many? Okay, well then, thank you. Because I don't know.
I'm going to interrupt for 1 second, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Medical's not an issue here. It's the recreational we're talking about.
I know, but I was just trying to get a pulse of the room.
Okay, but we're
The
trying to
medical's
get
already.
That's where I've
pulse
been
of
established.
the recreational.
So-
I think we got some. Thank you.
Okay.
And I'll just make my last comment just to respond to that. And this
Please
has
make
to do
it your
with,
last comment, because we've heard from you. You're a vendor, and we think we really want to hear from the public. But please
no,
finish.
absolutely. In terms of medical and recreational, at the end of the day, it's the same product. It's cannabis. Some people use it medically to help them with seizures. Other people use it as opposed to drinking a martini when they get home from a long day of work. That's just my opinion. We are not planning to operate a recreational dispensary on Main Street. Our medical dispensary is on Old South Road, out of the way, near the airport. It's not on Main Street. And then
I thought that location didn't meet the zoning requirements, and you're looking for a new location.
No, that was another group that wanted to get a license. So we got our license with, as I said, a previous location that had a setback issue. We found another property that does not have a setback issue. And our goal is to be out of the way so people know where to go for medical and recreational. And basically when We submit our application for a recreational location. We're flipping the sign. We're not adding another brick and mortar dispensary on Main Street. That's not the intent, just to be clear.
Okay. I guess the last point that I was wanting to make in regards to the transportation issue of marijuana being transported over the waters. If it's not going to be grown on the island, how will that actually be feasible? And that's a question. Thank you.
That's up to the business.
Well, there are special provisions that are supposed to be coming in May. Another reason why we want to do the moratorium, because we don't understand all the parameters yet, for us and Martha's Vineyard. We don't know how they're planning on dealing with it, but there's something that's coming.
If I could comment, I'm not sure. I mean, my concern about that is I don't see how the state would have any jurisdiction over federal waters. We could pass all the laws we want, but we have no jurisdiction over federal waters. And my concern is the special accommodations will be less restrictive than what is taking place in the rest of the Commonwealth. In other words, maybe they'll exempt us from testing. Maybe they'll allow us to use a seed source that's local rather than something that's tested and certified. We have to be careful that what they're putting in place doesn't create a more risky environment here. And that's why I think the moratorium is so important, that we get through that big issue, because that is a huge hurdle, that transportation. And if I could go back on a couple other things, since Colorado was brought up significantly, we've had some communication with the Colorado Chiefs of Police Association, and I have a personal friend who's an assistant police chief in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and the police aren't being heard out there in Colorado. And what is true statistics, according to them, are that since the recreational marijuana has taken place, hospital emergency room visits due to marijuana-related incidents have increased over 49%. But what is most concerning is in the first year of recreational marijuana, 62% of the traffic deaths due to marijuana, they had a 62% increase in traffic deaths due to marijuana. And, there is no chemical test to test somebody who's driving to determine their level of intoxication. There's only circumstantial evidence that can be gathered to try to make a case that the individual was under the influence. So it'll be a free-for-all in that sense, although it is illegal to consume alcohol or consume marijuana in a vehicle while you're transporting it. It's illegal to have it open in your vehicle. It's illegal to have it anywhere except in a locked compartment in the vehicle. So we do have some tools to use, but we don't have the same tools as we do with alcohol enforcement. Another, just so people don't have the wrong message, I know town council mentioned that 2 ounces is what an adult 21 and over is allowed to have. Actually, the guidance that the police chiefs received from the Commonwealth, from Public Safety Department, is a little bit more restrictive than that. The guidance we received only allows up to 1 ounce, and then anything above 1 ounce up to 2 ounce is a civil violation. So it's not a criminal violation, but it's still subject to civil, and anything beyond the 1 ounce is subject to seizure by the police. Right now, less than an ounce or an ounce or less is not subject to seizure. And just so you know, we brought around, this is what an ounce of pot looks like right there. It's a lot. So having 2 of those, or even if you have a medical marijuana license, you can have 10 of those in your house or in your possession. It's a lot.
Thank you, Chief.
And if one other concern about Colorado that's hasn't been really expressed is there has been a significant diversion problem from Colorado to other states that are not legal. That's a concern, and even EOPS has instructed law enforcement here in Massachusetts that, remember, we are now a legal state, but we still have to be good neighbors. So we have to be vigilant, and we have to keep an eye on things.
Hi, my name is Seth Engelborg. Thank you so much, everybody, for dealing with this complex piece of legislation. I know there's a lot of there's a lot of opinions on both sides. I specifically have a question related to the 3% local option sales tax. Don, I know you mentioned that there was a possibility to create a specialized tax fund for something like substance use prevention. Is there actually a way to write that into an amendment in an article to create a specialized fund for mental health, substance abuse prevention, or just health services in general? I think, in my opinion, recreational marijuana does a lot of good things. It provides access to the community. It provides quality of product. It provides regulation, and it also provides tax dollars. But I think that we should be using those tax dollars in a way that is going to be most beneficial for the community. And we have the option here to create that 3% local tax option and create a fund that will actually be benefiting people in a way that is specialized. So I think if there was a way to write that actually into an amendment, it would be quite beneficial.
Can I defer to the town manager?
I was just going to say this.
How to best earmark those dollars?
Sure. This came up at the Finance Committee meeting when the FinCom was developing its motion to that article. And we didn't have the answer at the time they were doing the motion, and there was a timing situation. So I think the answer came back from town council that, yes, you could put those funds in a special account. And I am not remembering right this second how we left it, but thank you for bringing that up. We can certainly look into that again and bring it to FinCom's attention before the special and the board as well.
I have a question on, since we're talking about taxes. So there's 17% that's excise and sales tax. That's going to be on recreational, and then another 3% for local. Do we know at all if any of that 17% is going to come back to local at all?
The state tax?
Yeah, the state tax. Does
I
any of
think
that
we've
come
heard
back?
that a very small amount will come back. Do you know, Katie?
I don't know the percentage, and I think that's still to be worked out.
Okay.
But municipalities should see some benefit from that. And I would also note that there's that option of the 3% host community agreement on the retail sales as well. So you have, in addition to the tax, another potential 3%, and those in many of the host community agreements we've negotiated have been earmarked for special purposes relating to public health and things like that.
So that's another 3% on top of the 3 that we're voting on.
Exactly.
So it could be 23% total.
Yeah.
Okay.
Was that the piece that you said was good for 5 years?
That's the 5-year piece, and that's the piece that has to be related to community impacts. It's required to offset community impacts.
Hi, I'm Melissa Murphy again. I also wanted to echo Seth's applause of you all for tackling this issue in a public forum like this. And I think that to answer some of Don's questions, just to get it started, if you want to hear some public input, I personally support the retail marijuana moratorium. I think I was at the Board of Selectmen meeting when you all made the decision to have a special town meeting and put this on, actually create the special town meeting for the purpose of protecting us so that we could retain maximum local control over that once the state gave us their information. So I think I'm going to vote yes on Article 1. And the zoning bylaw amendment, I also very much support. I struggle with what I see on Main Street today and what I want to see on Main Street. I certainly don't want to see pot cafes, and I know that that's not what we're talking about. Personally, that's not what I want to see. It's not the kind of community I want to live in, but I do want safe access to legal recreational marijuana. And so if our planning board has decided that the CN and CI areas are the safest and best places to start that, I would fully support that, and then we can see how that works. And if it's not working, we could come together as a community again and look for an expansion of that. So again, I'm going to vote yes on Article 2. I used to be the Director of Culture and Tourism, and we worked with local option taxes a lot, and they benefited our community, and we used those taxes, the meals tax and the lodging tax, directly to support tourism, and then we use that to support services that were required to support tourism. So I don't have a problem with the 3%, and I don't have a problem with some kind of amendment either at town meeting or beforehand that's recommended that earmarks that money for just those kinds of support services. I think we've all seen our Health and Human Services budget go down since the recession, and it's not really gone back up tremendously. So if we're talking about more globally Health and Human Services, fantastic. If we're talking about earmarking to an account to help our substance abuse community and mental health needs, which we are in continue to be in desperate need of more expansive services, awesome. I think the town has an opportunity to take a leadership role by enacting that local option tax and tax a legal substance and use the benefits of that tax money for the better of the community. So I know Don went out of the room. You asked for an opinion, and I'm giving you mine. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I would just like to make a comment regarding the taxes that are being collected and used to help addiction. With legalizing marijuana, we're increasing use of marijuana, and marijuana is addictive. I know a lot of people don't like to recognize that, but it is addictive, especially when it begins with adolescence. And so we're growing our pool of people that will go into and suffer from substance use disorders. And I'm skeptical that 23% tax will be sufficient to help address addiction. Prevention is super cheap. I'm on that side of it. It's a good side to be on. For my colleagues that are working on the other side, who are trying to work with people who have addiction and want to work on recovery, it's a long road, it's a hard road, it's an expensive road. And this system seems to be compromising any progress we could be making. And there is a very large epidemic going on of drug addiction in our country, and I don't believe that this is progressing us forward in addressing that and healing that, and I think that needs to be called out and addressed as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. I don't know. I didn't see who got up here first.
Hi, Christopher Cohn. I had a question about, we've been talking about the business models of just brick and mortar. Is there any other possible business models, such as a CSA collective or something, where the community could, support a place growing on the island, and then that way you don't have a storefront necessarily, but allowing safe access?
There is language in the Act that talks about growing cooperatives. There's not much about them in the Act at this point in time, but the Cannabis Control Commission has been charged with coming up with regulations to address growing cooperatives. So I think we'll see more how that plays out over the coming months. There is not language addressing retail cooperatives at this point in time.
And how would that affect the island in terms of with zoning and stuff? Do you still need the same zoning?
The zoning would still apply.
Still need the same?
Yeah.
Okay.
My thoughts on the matter is I don't think we should have a moratorium. I voted as an adult to be able to get access to cannabis, and if you're going to moratorium it, and like we said, medical was passed in 2012, there's no medical place here. It's 5 years later, so is it going to be 5 years later on the recreational front? And now you're forcing us who want to use it to have to go off island to get it. So another thing I have to go off island for and can't get access to in my home area, or I have to go to the black market. And I don't think that's fair to any of the people who voted for this to push that off and make us have to wait longer and longer, and who knows how long, because it's already been 5 years for medical and there's nothing here. And I think in regards to the regulations that they're coming out with, if other towns are able to handle it when it comes out in May, we should be able to handle it. I think there's no issues with time management or pushing it off. I don't want to have to spend another year going, oh, I can go to the dispensary on the Cape and I have to take a $30, $70 round trip ferry to go get a bag of weed. It's not, I don't think it's fair to any of us who voted for it. And that's all I have to say.
I just have a question about potency and packaging. Do we have any regulations in place to prevent the recreational distributor or retail outlet from selling, brownies that look like random brownies or cookies or these edibles that are really high potency? What are they doing in Colorado? Some of the things that I've seen, even from medical dispensaries, are, they look like regular cookies or something. And I'm just curious what's going to be done to kind of control that aspect of the potency in the packaging.
So that is an area of state control, and that's going to be addressed in the regulations from the Cannabis Control Commission. And there's going to be statewide regulations that apply to packaging, potency, labeling, all of those issues. That's going to be an area that's preempted by state control, and it's very unlikely that there will be given local control to how that type of packaging and labeling is addressed.
But is there anything in place now? I mean, what would be the current, if we opened the shop in the spring for retail sales, what would be the regulations that now exist?
They would be governed by the regulations that come into effect on the 15th of March.
That's part of the reason why we've requested the temporary moratorium, because we don't know all the rules yet. And it's just, I don't want to push things off for no reason, but not knowing the rules as someone who's supposed to put policy into place, it's just not responsible.
Can I jump in on that too? One of the things to answer potency questions is there's a lot of questions about the aspects and the active ingredients here. So recreational marijuana, a lot of what people are wanting to see in it is high levels of THC, the tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the psychoactive substance that makes people high. Right now, there is no level. There's very little studies of THC in the dosing. What I have seen out of Colorado and places like California and things like that is what's considered in pharmacology the minimum effective dose is 10 milligrams. Some of the joints that are coming out of these dispensaries in California have THC concentrations of 90 milligrams, which is 9 times the minimum effective dose. There's no studies of what considered a lethal dose of THC yet, the LD50 tests. And then as far as medical marijuana, there's the CBD, the cannabidiol, and things like CBN, which is cannabinol. These, you're looking for the dosage of these, and a lot of that dosage still hasn't been set, and that's going to be, they're looking to do that by the Cannabis Control Commission.
Thank you. Harvey?
My name is Harvey Young. I appreciate using cannabis, and I'm really psyched that I can do it now legally. I don't envy you guys having to try to figure out how to deal with it, that the state put it on the ballot without a whole lot of guidelines. I have traveled a little bit, not to go to dispensaries, but I have been in Washington where you could go shopping for it. And I really appreciated that it was, to me, it was similar to going to a liquor store where you could, with the right guidance, decide if you wanted to have tequila or vodka, or maybe you just wanted to have a light beer. That's how I found that it was packaged. I'm looking forward to sometime being able to go into a legal store and purchase it in Nantucket. I see no problem with this moratorium that you talked about, that what puts it off until January 1 of 19. That's a few months from now. And the state gave you, well, I call that a few months. I mean, it's going to go by really fast. I mean, the state didn't give you a whole lot to work with, and they're working on trying to sort it out. So I have no problem with the moratorium. I am looking forward to being able to go to a legal store where I can purchase cannabis. I would be okay if it's not out in an industrial area next to the strip club, but I don't feel like I need to see it right downtown. So good luck. I appreciate you putting this forum on so people can talk about it, and good luck sorting out how we're going to deal with all this. Thank you.
I'm now an even bigger Harvey Young fan. Again, no dog in this fight, and I've had conversations with multiple people and sort of sit on the fence about this every day, about the retail component. And I'm curious, so if the town meeting does not pass the moratorium, so if that doesn't happen, we can't vote to make that happen, and the trains leave the station with or without us. Is it even feasible that someone could get all the way through the licensing process and get something open and operational here on island by the deadlines that we're talking, especially if the state doesn't figure out about our federal waters in the meantime? Like, is it even feasible if the moratorium doesn't happen? I know that this takes a really long time. Not just a lot of money, but a long time to get through the state licensing process. And even if someone's in the process now, and I know there's at least two people in the room now that are in that process with the town and the state and everything else, do you think it would even be feasible by January 1, 2018? Am I saying that right? No, it's the
19.
January 1, 2019 to be open. Yeah. Okay. So we need the moratorium to hold it up.
Would you like
that?
Can I? Yeah. So to address, just to go back to the timeline of how this all plays out, as of April 1st, so back up for 1 second. There's two different things on the table here. One is the medical marijuana treatment centers. Those are the two applications that are pending. We're talking the retail marijuana establishments and that side of things. And that's the zoning moratorium applies to that. As of April 1st, whatever zoning is in place at the time of an application on April 1st is what's going to govern that application. So if there's no zoning passed by Nantucket with respect to either time, place, or manner, or a moratorium to put things on hold, then it's wide open as to any applicant that comes in as of that date as to where they could potentially locate.
Yeah, I'm talking about a scenario where we get our zoning passed, we talk about our sales tax, but the moratorium doesn't happen. And my understanding is that the medical can then, is further, at least further down the road to applying for recreational licensure. Right. So that's the scenario I'm talking about, is the moratorium doesn't happen. We've got people that are licensed for medical already. They go for their recreational, but we don't have a moratorium in place. Is it feasible for them to open a recreational before we're ready?
Probably.
Depends on how fast the license is issued and whether they are able to make it through the zoning process on the town level, because there is a special permit component as well.
Hi, Joanna Roach. I think the most important question here is whether or not we want to make sure that Main Street is not zoned for retail, right? So correct me if I'm wrong in the understanding of this process. I think it's March 15th, there are certain guidelines that are issued that would prevent us then from, because it's so late, of putting anything on the ballot in April, right? So right now, the question on number 2, forget the moratorium for a second. The question really on number 2 is, if I wanted to open a retail store on Main Street right now, I could apply for a license, right? And you would have to hear that in some fashion, and I could in fact open it on Main Street.
On June 1st.
Right. It's retail by right. So I think that's a really important thing for people to understand. And I think the equally important thing to understand is what the zoning is attempting to do is to say, we know this is coming. Here are the places we find it acceptable to be. And so I just think that everybody who's here should understand those facts. Otherwise, by June 1st, without the zoning number 2 passing, it is plausible that somebody could come forward, put forth ask for an application and a permit, and be on Main Street.
Anywhere where retail.
It could also be an RC or RC2, and it could be directly next door to numerous single-family home residents.
But in terms of community feedback, which is why everybody's here, I think that we should be thinking about where we want this to be. I don't think the question is anymore whether we want it, whether or not we want it. I don't think that's the question. I think the question really is where should this be? And where do the citizens of the community see this being where it would be of service to everyone and be safe for everyone?
An important point is how they're going to handle edibles, because I think that another big community concern is products getting into the hands of children that they don't necessarily recognize what it is.
I kind of want to echo what you said earlier of why the board is put this forth for moratorium. And I understand the gentleman who said, I don't want to wait another 5 years, another year. It's taking a while. We're trying to make the best decision for the entire community. I think the moratorium it makes sense because we don't know what the state's going to come out with in March and April. And I've been on the board for 6 months. And I feel like 20% of my time has been talking and listening to Katie about marijuana, and this is how long it's taken us to get to here. And so there's already been 2 or 3 times where the state has changed something, and we have to kind of reassess and ask, kind of be a detective again. So I think that's one of the reasons why the moratorium is there. And also, it's 2/3 vote, right?
Yes.
So the moratorium, so Article 1 and 2 has to pass with 2/3 vote, which isn't always that easy.
Hi, good evening. Tom Dixon. I'm our State Rep Dylan Fernandez, liaison in Nantucket. I just want to clarify about the transportation rules. When the large marijuana omnibus passed the state legislature in the spring, Senator Sear and Representative Fernandez did include an amendment to direct the CCC, the Cannabis Control Commission, to take up this about the issues about the transportation in air and water, because they both are regulated by the federal government, the FAA, and through the waters, and that's a big issue. And they want to make sure that that is pursued by the CCC to make sure that that's able for Nantucket residents and people to sort that out in a sane way. So I just wanted to include that they are well aware of that, and on top of that with the CCC. And the CCC will be meeting with interested parties for the Cape and Islands over the next couple months once they get their full body together.
Hi there, Carlin Vol. I just have a quick zoning question. Would an applicant be able to apply for a special permit in this instance for operating in something that, so basically, rather there's some places downtown that are hotels, but then someone applies for a special permit to make it an art gallery. Is this something where a special permit would be heard?
To take it outside of the zoning
Correct.
that's proposed? Holly?
I think town council might be able to correct me if I'm wrong on this one. But if we don't have a moratorium, we will, and hopefully we'll have the zoning. Yes, a special permit would be allowed to go through that process. However, I'm not too sure. I mean, at the end of the day, it is a special permit process. No moratorium. If there's no moratorium, then yes. If there is a moratorium, then no.
Right. So there's language in the provision of Article 2 that says no building permit for recreational marijuana establishment shall issue until the recreational marijuana shall be established, shall be subject to the zoning moratorium, and applicants may not apply for a special permit for recreational marijuana establishments prior to January 1st of 2019. If there's no marijuana moratorium, then that provision would not be effective. And so, they can apply for a special permit anytime, if I understand your question correctly.
Yeah, I was just making sure that I was more feeling out the laws around it, that they would be able to apply for special permit. So
If the moratorium is in place, the specific language of the bylaw would preclude them from even filing an application until January 1st of 2019.
Great, thank you.
I just also wanted to stress the fact that Article 2, the definitions that are in here are strictly from the state law. The one that was specifically for marijuana establishment, recreational, and for medical, right out of state law.
As far as the licensing goes, I know the state issues the license, but the way that the county is applying it, I mean, it's like a liquor license, right? I mean, if I wanted to open up a package store on Main Street, you would have the right to deny that, right? Am I wrong in that?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So although the Cannabis Control Commission is set up to mirror in some ways the way the Alcoholic Beverages Control Commission operates, as of right now, there's no indication that there's going to be an additional tier of local licensing beyond the zoning. And so whereas you come and apply to the Board of Selectmen for your alcoholic beverages license and they have some discretion to deny that, there's not a similar licensing provision on the marijuana side of things. They would just have to comply with the zoning, which in this case, what is proposed is a special permit.
Yeah. And Katie, the host community agreement, it's not licensing, but it's
The host
more of a contract, right?
That would be a contractual agreement.
Right.
I just have one question, and I guess it upsets me that I keep hearing, oh, we don't want to shop on Main Street. And my question is, we have bars on Main Street, we have liquor stores on Main Street, and having been raised in a family that was headed up by an alcoholic, I can tell you that those two places are as detrimental to a child's growing up as having marijuana available. So if you're not going to hold them the same level, which they are, aren't we picking on one side versus the other? And shouldn't we be more concerned with the children being given the opioids and getting access to the opioids through their through their doctors? All the children that are hurt in sports, that are becoming addicted before they're even out of high school?
That's one of the things we want to hear. Do you want them allowed on Main Street? That's for the community to decide. And I am very much more concerned with the opioid crisis than anything we're talking about here.
The whole argument of opening one up on Main Street. Now, Megan, you've looked at the numbers. Where'd Megan go? You've looked at the numbers of starting up a shop? Yes. And we all know the outrageous landlord prices for Main Street. Would they ever be able to succeed on Main Street? Or are we just trying to hype up the game of, oh my God, we don't want this on Main Street?
Hi, I'm Vanessa. I'm from Boulder, Colorado. And so I guess, I'm from Boulder, Colorado. If you've never been, you should go. So they have recreational retail on Pearl Street, which is a thoroughfare through downtown Boulder that's just for people to walk on. Oh, sorry. So they have recreational retail on Pearl Street, which is similar to Main Street. And it's really, incognito. You wouldn't really know it's there unless you're looking for it. So I don't think it's as detrimental to the community as some people might be alluding to. So just to give my input, I guess I wanted to just say that I don't think the moratorium is necessarily necessary. It would be nice to see things move along as it already feels like there's a lot of barriers to entry for recreational in the community. The zoning laws seem a little bit stringent, so it'd be nice to see some more lax in that department. And yeah, that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Hi, Maria Zoda. I just want to make sure that everybody understands this, because I think one lady articulated it pretty well. If we don't vote the moratorium, we're pretty much giving away local control, because the state will license the recreational and marijuana person, and they'll go off and do what they care to do. Is that correct? If we don't do the moratorium, if we don't say, wait a minute, let's decide as a community, what do we want to do with this important issue, then the state will license people and you're just going to say, go ahead, right? Is that right? Excuse me? If we don't do the moratorium, if we don't say, wait a minute, and let's see what we want to do as a local community, then the state will license people. And
if the moratorium were to not pass, but Article 2 passes, an establishment could open in CN or CI by June 1st.
Right. Okay, that's what. Okay, I understand it. Does everybody understand that?
If neither pass,
Okay.
an establishment could open anywhere commercially zoned by June 1st.
Okay, so we're giving up a lot of that local control. That's all.
I'd also like to add one thing, that the Cannabis Control Commission, which is a 5-member board, we don't know what they're going to come up with in March 15th, April 1st. But they did appoint 4 people who voted against legalizing marijuana. So my guess is, I know you probably can't talk on this, but my guess is it's going to be highly regulated. Now, what we don't know is how much control they're going to give at a local level. Just throwing that out there.
I'd also like to address the point that was raised, the question about alcohol and marijuana and what messages we're sending to our young people. From the perspective of the Alliance for Substance Abuse Prevention, of which I'm here to represent tonight, alcohol is here, and it is already a problem in our young people, in the community of our young people. The high school has 50% higher rates of alcohol intake than the rest of the country for that same age group. We're very concerned about that. Marijuana is, I hear different things. I hear the access to that is perhaps sometimes easier for high school kids than alcohol. However, there's still the legal question and still making preparations for how our community will look once that law is here and is in place. Our perspective is we need time as a community to make proper preparations and take precautions to help protect our high school students that are using the substance. We are aware of that. We are doing our best to provide education to them about how the adolescent brain is impacted by consuming marijuana and how that is a setup for addiction. Lifelong tendency goes up the younger you start smoking marijuana. We're very concerned about that, and so we definitely want to see the moratorium in place so that we can address it wholeheartedly in a wholesome way that protects not just high schoolers but very young children, and takes those precautions in place.
Thank you.
I'd like to go back to the transportation over federal jurisdiction issue for a second. I think the efforts of State Senator Sear and State Representative Fernandez, but no matter what the state does, no matter what the Cannabis Control Commission does, ultimately state law doesn't supersede federal law. And when we get back to the overview of the law that Katie gave to us, we're allowed to provide or to create restrictions up to the point where we're not doing anything to completely ban access. So we on Nantucket are a town, and we're also a county. And I think that we need to think clearly about making sure that we do create a zoning or create a plan to make it possible, both legislatively and economically, to actually have a marijuana establishment here, because the transportation issue is going to be extremely complex, and it's unique. We're an island, and beyond the legislative side, some people simply don't have the time, don't have the resources or the money to take a boat to the Cape or wherever else to get access to a legal substance. So I think that I support the moratorium, I support the zoning, but I think we need to look at the feasibility of the zoning very carefully and see if there are places that are viable for marijuana establishments here. Because if we push it down the line to the point where we're creating no viable locations, then we're doing injustice to the voters, we're doing injustice to the law, and we're limiting access to people that otherwise will not have access or will have very restricted access. So we need to really keep it in mind that we do have a unique situation here where we want to create the regulations that are right, but we need those regulations to actually provide possibilities for businesses, and to also think that beyond the use side, we need to make sure that we're creating opportunities for economic opportunities here. People that are going to be running those establishments are going to be benefiting the community as well from a financial side. So we just have to be really careful about how detailed we are in restrictions versus it's a balance. You know, we don't want to go too fast, and we don't want to have no regulations, but we also don't want to have too many regulations to make it not feasible here. So it takes a lot of public input, but also it's going to be tough work by the Board of Selectmen and everyone else involved. I don't envy you, but I think we need to think about it from a very unique perspective as an island that other municipalities and other counties aren't going to have to face.
Thank you very much.
She's going to be shy in the back, but she's not a great public speaker. But I'm apparently the only person that brought their teenager with them to participate in this conversation, because I think it's an important conversation. It's a perspective that's not mine anymore, and I'm interested. So instead of saying, well, I think kids will or will not use, I'm saying, well, if there was a dispensary on Main Street, what do you think about that? Would it make you feel like it was better or worse? Or do you think more kids would use it or not? And, you know, considering the fact that there's edibles being sold in high school bathrooms on this island right now, and it's illegal, will it change? There's alcohol consumed and marijuana consumed at high school parties on a pretty regular basis. We have a pretty frank conversation about that in our household. You know, the alcohol is legal and kids are not buying it. They're not presenting an ID, although maybe on occasion they are. Small community, most of us know who those kids are and how old they are. I know I worked in a lot of liquor stores and would see people come through the door and knew just what year they had graduated from high school and if it was legal or not. It doesn't change the amount of alcohol that they're consuming. They're still getting a hold of it, right? So how does this change our student's view? And in my student's view, it doesn't change a lot. She still kind of feels the same way about it, and you know, still knows that there's adults that drink and it's not okay for kids to drink, and there'll be adults that smoke and it's not okay for kids to smoke. At least that's what she's telling me for right now. Maybe that's because that's what I want to hear. I'm realistic about that. But kids are selling edibles in the high school bathroom. So I'll put that on the table to sort of digest about, I don't think we're introducing a new substance to these kids in their lives and what they're aware of.
Thank you for those comments, and thank you for coming, an unknown high schooler. I think it's great that you're here to participate in this discussion. For us, the issue is a question of normalization, and right now, yes, it's accessible, and you know, the conversation has changed, and now we're looking at things like medical marijuana. Now it goes from medical marijuana to marijuana recreationally, and that changes things and opens the discussion for, well, what else gets normalized? From my mind, it's not just about marijuana. It's about a broader picture that was also brought up, big questions and concerns about opioid epidemic, and this can be a place that a lot of people start from. It's not like heroin users just.
Okay, let's please come to order.
I'm sorry.
Can we please come to order? Erin, are you about wrapped up?
I'm not saying that every person who uses marijuana goes on to use heroin. I'm not saying that at all. But there is also a flip side of that as well, that heavier drugs also start with lighter drugs, including alcohol and marijuana. And so the concern is introducing that, normalizing that for young kids.
Okay, I'm just going to interject here for a second. Again, back to what the chair has said. We are looking for public input about where we would want an establishment on the island. We are not really here to discuss the science behind any of this. We, as someone said, I forget who it was, but they spoke very well about it. I think it was Joanna, actually. We know it's here. It's legal. Where are we going to put it? That's what we want to hear about. I think we've heard some interesting stuff about Main Street, and we'd love to hear more.
We could start with the zoning that we've requested to put in place with Article 2. We could expand the zoning at the subsequent town meeting in the spring. Passing an article doesn't end. The next town meeting, the article could be repealed, the zoning can be altered. So there are numerous options. I mean, another thing we were looking for direction on, I don't think that anyone in this, or the majority in this room, is not in favor of any kind of limitation or ban, is the message I've gotten so far. But that was another question we had. So that's all. Those are the important things that we need to know. It's not a back and forth about who's in favor and who's not. It's been voted.
I just think it's funny that the one issue that you bring up for the moratorium is one of the reasons that you bring up for a moratorium is to push back to make regulations because access to kids. And I think it's funny that kids are buying edibles in the school and I can't go buy one because I'm an adult. I should be able to buy it. And your issue is they're going to get it. You know, we're all adults. Don't treat us like kids. We're allowed to do what we want. If someone's going to break the law and give it to a kid, there's laws for that. He can arrest them. That's not an issue. The issue is we should have access to it, and it shouldn't be delayed or bureaucratically disputed. Just give it to us. We voted for it. I can't believe that we're still talking about a plant in 2017 that should be legally accessed for us.
How do you feel about Article 2?
To put it in any zone that's commercial and more than 500 or 1,000 feet away from a school. Put it somewhere way out. Put it on the other side of the airport on that Baxter Road by the VFW. Put it somewhere where no one will see it. I don't care. But we should have it.
Hi, my name's Tess Dale-Berdy, and I'm not speaking on behalf of our Substance Abuse and Mental Health Agency, but just as a citizen. I'll start with the zoning. I think it looks a little conservative, and I'm a little worried that some of the high-density, year-round, hardworking families would have a lot of pressure, so I would be looking to have more expansive areas. Essex Road, Macy's Lane, Old South, we already have a lot of traffic on that. I just would think it would be nice to expand it, as someone said, further out. Article 3, the 3% tax towards treatment, yes, please. Our Health and Human Services absolutely need it. Article 1, around pushing it back, I would always like to see more policy in place to understand it, but my general consensus for the community is that we're not going to get 2/3.
do you have any contingency plans just in case that you don't get the moratorium?
The zoning,
The zoning? Yeah.
which could then be tweaked.
And that's why it's moratorium's number one, zoning's number two, for that reason.
We have about 15 more minutes, and we are very willing to hear what other people have to say, I think, that maybe who haven't spoken about the specific articles. Don't be shy.
Just one more thought. I agree with what my neighbor here said about this. If you're wondering whether to put marijuana accessibility downtown, Main Street, I think you need to consider what's the behavior of the people who come, how many bars do we have, and how much is this island marketed as a binge drinking location? You know, you have Fagawi, they sell shirts that have a martini glass and they have the island image. And when they come, you know, on 4th of July, you know, law enforcement knows what's the behavior of people who are binge drinking compared to people who are smoking pot. And if we allowed it downtown, you know, how many people who are slugging it out in the streets and vomiting would be replaced by people sitting around and giggling, you know. So would that be a better thing, you know?
Could be very positive for late night food establishments.
We'd have to increase the closing times.
I have questions, but they're not exactly pertaining to the transportation or what's going on. But I just wanted to know where can you get a medical card on Nantucket, and will there be a doctor that will be prescribing medical cards here so we don't have to go off island? Does anyone know that question?
That's entirely up to the doctor if they're willing to prescribe
Up to your regular
your primary care.
Okay.
Your doctor has to register. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And are doctors on Nantucket registered with the Department of Health? Because I know a lot of people have had
Not
to go
that I
off
know of.
island to
Not
do
that I know of, no.
Yeah, because that's something that is interesting, and people have to get medical cards off island, and it would kind of be cool to get them on island if we could eventually. But and then when is the town meeting where we need to vote 2/3?
Monday, November 6th,
Okay, so this Monday.
following.
Next Monday.
Great.
2 weeks, almost.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else at all who might not have spoken yet?
Sorry.
Thank you, John.
I'm John O'Connor, and I'm going to represent the senior citizens today because I know there's a lot of giggling about marijuana, but what I'm interested in really on the medical aspect is there's a lot of non-intoxicating cannabinoids, medicines. I read about that they're making topical solutions that help. You know, I suffer from arthritis. I know a lot of people my age and older would like to have some kind of access to the non-intoxicating aspects of cannabis. I mean, there has to be, I read about it. I don't know. I haven't been to Colorado, so I haven't experienced it, but I read that there are medicines out there that are beneficial and non-intoxicating. And by, 5 years, we still don't have access to that. And, the people my age and older, I think, are interested in that. So I hope we don't slow it down too much. And I don't think it'll ever be on Main Street with the prices.
Again, none of this discussion is in regard to the medical.
I know.
Okay, I just want to make sure that everybody continues to know that.
No one's talking about that. Real medical reasons besides getting stolen.
The answer is that there are some creams that are already available. There are some actually already available on island. Some of them that have, like I said, the hemp extract, CBD, things like that. We can talk about it later. And it is legally available already, areas that come with these creams already done. As far as the concept of the medicine goes, it's kind of a misnomer. Well, it's more of a supplement. Medicines are regulated by the Federal Drug Administration. They have to go through clinical trials, whole 9 yards. There is only one medicine that has been approved by the FDA. It's called Marinol, and it would have to be prescribed by your doctor. That's
Okay, you can ask about that stuff
Different
later because
question.
we're trying to get back to where we would want the recreational. Mary?
Yes, on that point. Thank you, Libby. Hi, I'm Mary Adams. The question that I have that just to encourage thought is to meet an obligation or a need for placing recreational facilities someplace. Does it want to be part of our tourism, or does it want to be something to support our community? And my opinion would be that it's, if it's for our community, then put it someplace that our community can get it peacefully with parking, without having to, come into town if that's the issue that they're looking for. I have, no personal interest, but if I also truly believe that that the board and the community should listen to the will of the people. And if the will of the people have voted, then I think we have to be open to that and find a careful, conservative way of doing it. So given that, my suggestion would be to look for zoning that would take it away from a more populated area with parking. And I think the reason that Harvey was saying that 2019 is just a few months away is that his lead time for making his map probably takes a long time, and this is give him an opportunity to put it on his map for his bicycle path, and then it would solve a lot of problems. No driving, you could take your bike there, and all of those things. And the other thing that I would suggest is if we're struggling so much with very strong opinions on other sides, and some of them are non-negotiable. Let's take those two people and put them over here, but find some other people in the middle and maybe form some type of a committee or commission where they collaboratively can work together on the zoning issues and where they might want to do things. Because I've heard a number of very rational people, and everybody here is rational. I'm not taking that away from anyone. But some people that have understood the other positions on either side. This young man over here has brought up some wonderful points. A number of people have brought up some really, really collaborative thinking. And I think that's the only way to make something like this succeed is to collaborate rather than keep disagreeing on, health issues or different things like that. So put it on the bike path and go from there. But I think personally to keep it away from the tourism. We don't want people to add that to their Nantucket experience. We want to be able to meet the obligation that the law passed, which was to give it to the citizens of Nantucket. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seven minutes or so. There's a lot of information online, I think, about this whole issue, and as I think you've heard today, it is a really dynamic situation with the state and all of their regulations. I feel like every week or so I hear something new on the news or in the newspaper about what the latest changes are. There's a lot of information about what towns have done what sorts of things. So if you're questioning any of that, just Google it and see what's out there if you haven't done that already.
Libby, one of the things I was thinking about here that if kind of taken off on Mary's comments, if people are worried that recreational marijuana is going to be here and we're going to have people walking up and down Main Street or on our beaches everywhere getting high and everything, that's not going to happen. Nothing in the law allows that to happen. It's still illegal to do it in a public place or where the public has right of access under the law. And Nantucket has a bylaw that actually prohibits smoking of marijuana in these locations as well, in addition to the state law. So, this is really something that's done inside the privacy of one's home for the most part. I'm sure there will be gatherings and other things, and there'll be issues, but I don't, and I don't support a marijuana location myself on Main Street, but I don't think that if one happened to be there, I don't think we would have intoxicated or under the influence people walking up and down the sidewalk. Because one thing, if I'm not mistaken, I believe the rules will probably reflect if somebody comes into a facility that's under the influence, they're probably not going to sell them any more stuff at that point. They'll probably be prohibited. If I'm guessing the rules will turn out the way most likely I think they will.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming out. I'm not ending the evening, but I'm just really happy to see this full room. I was nervous that 3 people would show up, so I'm really happy that everybody came out. And I think from a elected official standpoint, I got to hear a lot of different views on just what everybody personally thinks, but also on the 3 articles, which is what we were looking for at a board level, was guidance from the community. And it's really hard to get without public forums like this. I know they're really hard to get to. We're all busy. So I just want to say thank you, and I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you all very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.